The date was June 17th, 1943, the time, 14:37 hours. In the heart of the North Atlantic Ocean, 280 nautical miles west of the Irish coast, the world was a churning canvas of gunmetal gray. From the windswept bridge of the USS Stalwart, a Buckley-class destroyer escort, Commander James Sterling, just 34 years old, but aged by 17 convoy crossings, watched the horizon. His men called him Bull, not for his size, but for the stubborn, head-down way he charged at any problem, be it a winter gale or a German U-boat. Spread before him were the 40 silhouettes of merchant freighters, the lifeblood of the Allied war effort, plodding eastward. This was Convoy HX 240, carrying the steel, fuel, and food essential for the invasion of Europe planned for the following year. 40 cargo ships, 127,000 tons of material, and 2,400 civilian crewmen whose lives now rested in his hands. But Sterling knew something the merchant captains didn't. A chilling secret delivered by the frantic clatter of the radio room's decoding machine just hours before. Naval intelligence had cracked a fresh German transmission. A wolf pack, codenamed Seawolf, was forming a picket line directly across their path. 12 U-boats, coordinated and lying in silent ambush. The numbers were brutal, a cold arithmetic of death that Sterling recited in his sleep. In the last 6 weeks, German torpedoes had sent 96 Allied ships to the bottom of the North Atlantic. The specific route Convoy HX 240 was now steaming. A stretch of ocean the sailors called Torpedo Junction was a graveyard. 23 freighters sunk in the last 30 days alone. The loss rates were becoming unsustainable. The math was killing them. And Sterling's resources? For destroyer escorts, the tireless workhorses of the fleet, to defend 40 merchantmen against 12 apex predators. The equation was simple and terrifying. There were not enough shepherds for the flock. He gripped the cold steel of the bridge railing, the icy wind stinging his face. He felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle upon him, heavier than any anchor. Down below, thousands of men were eating, sleeping, writing letters home, blissfully unaware that they were sailing directly into the jaws of the wolf. Later that evening, in the cramped confines of his sea cabin, Sterling slid a worn leather-bound notebook from a locked drawer. For the past 8 months, he had been obsessively documenting the single greatest tactical failure that was costing the U.S. Navy the Battle of the Atlantic. The problem wasn't finding the U-boats, it was killing them. The issue was time. Deadly, unforgiving time. When a sonar man got a ping, a solid echo bouncing off a submerged steel hull, a deadly clock started ticking. The destroyer escort had to accelerate, charging toward the submarine's last known position. As it passed over the contact, it would drop a pattern of depth charges from its stern racks. Then, critically, it had to race away at flank speed before the crushing underwater explosions of its own weapons could damage its own hull. The entire process, from the final sonar ping to the first detonation, took between 45 and 60 seconds. A lifetime in submarine warfare. The German captain and lieutenants were neither stupid nor suicidal. They knew this playbook by heart. The moment they heard the telltale ping-ping-ping of an active sonar search, they knew they had at least 45 seconds to live. A Type 7 U-boat could change its depth by 100 feet in that time, or execute a hard turn. It was a deadly dance of prediction and evasion. By the time the 300-pound cylinders of Torpex, an explosive 50% more powerful than TNT, blasted geysers into the sky, the U-boat was simply no longer there. Sterling flipped through the pages of his notebook. The entries were a litany of failure, written in his precise, angry script. 37 separate depth charge attacks he had personally commanded or witnessed. 37 confirmed sonar contacts. 0 confirmed kills. The system wasn't just flawed, it was fundamentally broken. American ingenuity was being defeated by German engineering in a few fatal seconds on a stopwatch. Then, 3 weeks ago, during yet another failed attack west of the Azores, an idea had surfaced in his mind. A thought so radical, so contrary to established doctrine that his executive officer had looked at him as if he'd lost his mind. It was an idea born of pure desperation. What if the depth charges didn't wait for the escort to clear the area? What if they could be made to explode the very instant the stalwart was directly over the target? The immediate objection was survival. A standard Mark 9 depth charge, packed with 300 pounds of Torpex, detonating less than 160 feet from your own ship, was tactical suicide. The hydrostatic shockwave would buckle the hull plates, shatter delicate machinery, and turn the engine room into a morgue. The concussion alone could kill every man on board. But Sterling wasn't thinking about standard charges. He was thinking about something entirely new. The solution, he had realized with a jolt of clarity, wasn't in the Navy manual. It was in the trash. On June 18, 1943, at 6 o'clock hours, the foggy, salt-scrubbed air of the Argentian Naval Station in Newfoundland felt heavy with damp and diesel fumes. Sterling walked the length of the rain-slicked pier, his footsteps echoing on the wet timber. Beside him was Chief Gunner's mate Thomas Hendricks, a man whose face was a roadmap of 14 years in the Navy, every line earned in a different ocean. Sterling laid out his idea, his voice low and urgent against the cries of the gulls. Hendricks listened in stony silence, his gaze fixed on the gray water. The proposal was technically audacious, bordering on insane. Sterling wanted to modify their depth charges. Not a minor tweak, but a complete reimagining. He wanted to take Mark 9 casings and drastically reduce the explosive filler from 300 pounds of Torpex to a mere 40 pounds. Then, he wanted to attach these miniaturized bombs to improvised flotation devices made from empty glass bottles, the kind discarded by the dozen from the base canteen. The bottles would be corked, sealed with hot pitch to make them watertight, and lashed together. Each of these bottle floats would be connected to a modified depth charge by a length of hemp rope, cut to precisely 30 feet. The attack plan was the most counterintuitive part. As the stalwart raced directly over the sonar contact, the crew would simply roll these contraptions off the fantail. The bottle float, Sterling theorized, would hit the water and create drag, holding its position on the surface as the ship sped away. The 30-foot rope would unspool and pull taut, yanking the small depth charge downward through the water, effectively towing it into a vertical position directly above the unsuspecting U-boat below. A standard hydrostatic fuse, set to detonate at a shallow 50 feet, would do the rest. The result? The time from the ship passing over the target to the explosion would be slashed to a mere 8 seconds. The U-boat commander would have no time to react. The blind spot, the fatal dead time, when the sonar lost contact as the ship passed overhead, would be eliminated. When Sterling finished, Hendricks chewed on the inside of his cheek for a long moment. He finally posed the only question that mattered. "Commander," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble, "are you absolutely certain that 40 pounds of Torpex detonating 140 feet off our stern won't fracture our hull?" Sterling met his gaze and answered with the brutal honesty that had earned him his crew's respect. "No, Chief, I'm not. But I know for a fact that what we're doing now isn't working. 96 sunken ships in 6 weeks prove we need to do something radical, and we need to do it now." Hendricks stared out at the cold gray harbor, then slowly nodded, a flicker of grim determination in his eyes. "We're going to need about 200 empty bottles, sir." For the next 36 hours, the fantail of the USS Stalwart was transformed into a bizarre workshop, a desperate exercise in American ingenuity. The crew, accustomed to the precise, heavy machinery of naval ordnance, now found themselves handling refuse. The empty bottles came from 3 sources: the base galley, 2 pubs in nearby St. John's whose owners donated their empties to the cause, and, ironically, 60 bottles of fine French champagne liberated from a freighter that had just docked. Each of the 40 modified charges was a work of art. 8 glass bottles were carefully inspected for cracks, filled with air, sealed with corks, and then dipped in a bubbling cauldron of hot, black pitch for a perfect waterproof seal. They were then bound tightly together with copper wire to form a single, buoyant cylinder. The modified depth charge, its 40-pound Torpex load, seeming almost laughably small, was then attached to the float with exactly 30 feet of oil-treated hemp rope. The work was painstaking. Each unit took 90 minutes to assemble. The sailors, with their trademark gallows humor, started calling them Bull's Folly or the commander's crazy coconuts. But Sterling was ever present, supervising the construction of every single one. His obsession was the rope. It had to be exactly 30 feet. Not 29, not 31. 30 feet. On that precise measurement, lives depended. At 11 o'clock hours on June 19th, the USS Stalwart slipped its moorings and steamed out of Argentia Harbor to rendezvous with convoy HX-240. The 40 modified charges were stowed on the aft deck, hidden from curious eyes beneath a heavy waterproof tarpaulin. Sterling hadn't informed his superiors. He hadn't requested authorization. He knew the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the Navy would have studied his proposal to death, forming committees and running tests until the war was long over. This was a gamble, pure and simple. If it worked, he would be hailed for his tactical innovation. If it failed and damaged his ship, he would face a court-martial for the unauthorized modification of naval weaponry. The night of June 20th was moonless and black, the sea a cold, indifferent expanse. At 22:18 hours, inside the cramped, dark sonar shack of the Stalwart, the world was reduced to sound. Sonar man second-class Bobby Jensen, a 19-year-old from Ohio, whose shipmates called him Ears, pressed his headphones tight. He was a prodigy, trained at the Fleet Sonar School in Key West, able to discern the subtlest variations in the echoes that came back through the cold Atlantic depths. Suddenly, he stiffened. Through the crackle of static and the groan of the ship's own machinery, he heard it. A faint, metallic return. Ping. Da pong. He spun his dials, refining the bearing. Sonar to bridge. I have a possible contact. Bearing 215, range approximately 1,400 yards. On the bridge, Sterling grabbed the voice tube. Con, sonar. Give me a character evaluation, Jensen. Bridge, sonar. It's a long ping, sir. Hard, solid echo. Moving slow. I think it's the real deal. Confirmed submarine running at periscope depth. Maybe 40 feet down. A jolt went through the bridge crew. This was it. Sterling didn't hesitate. Oh, engines ahead flank. Right standard rudder to course 215. Sound general quarters. The ship shuddered as the turbines spooled up, the deck vibrating with immense power. The sleek destroyer Escort heeled over, slicing through the waves as it accelerated from 8 knots to a full 16 in under a minute. The ship was a Greyhound unleashed, charging directly at the unseen enemy. 600 yards. Jensen's voice crackled over the speaker, tight with tension. Contact is holding course and speed. He's not maneuvering. I don't think he knows we're coming. The German commander, confident in his invisibility, was likely stalking the convoy, lining up a shot on a fat oil tanker. 300 yards. Gunnery chief to the fantail. Prepare special charges. Sterling barked into the microphone. On the stern, Chief Hendricks and his team wrestled the tarp off 2 of the bottle charges. In the dim red glow of the battle lanterns, the contraptions of glass and rope looked utterly absurd, like something a child might have built. But no one was laughing now. 100 yards. Jensen's voice was almost a shout. The echo was so loud he could hear it without his headphones now, a clear, sharp pong reverberating through the hull itself. Sterling took a deep breath, the wind whipping his words away. Launch charge 1. Hendricks and a sailor heaved the first modified charge over the side. The bottle float hit the churning wake with a splash and was instantly left behind as the Stalwart surged forward at 16 knots. The 30-foot rope unspooled in a flash, went taut, and the small depth charge was yanked down into the black water. 3 seconds later. Launch charge 2. The second device followed the first. The Stalwart shot directly over the spot where the U-boat lurked beneath the waves. On the bridge, every man held his breath. Jensen, his eyes squeezed shut in concentration, counted down into his microphone, his voice a tense whisper that filled the bridge. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The first explosion was a violent, jarring whump. It detonated just 140 feet off the stern, 50 feet beneath the surface. The entire ship bucked as if struck by a giant hammer. On the bridge, glass in a porthole crazed, and 3 men were thrown off their feet. But the hull held. 2 seconds later, the second charge detonated. Another brutal shudder vibrated through the steel deck plates, but the ship plowed onward. All engines stop. Hard to starboard. Stirling commanded, his heart pounding against his ribs. The stalwart slowed, turning in a wide arc. Jensen, back at his station, listened intently, straining to reacquire the sonar contact. There was only silence. The telltale echo was gone. For 40 agonizing seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the sea and the thrum of the idling engines. Had it worked? Had they missed? Then at 22:21 hours, the ocean itself erupted. 200 yards off their port bow, a massive secondary explosion tore the surface apart. A pillar of water, black oil, and white foam shot 100 feet into the night air, followed by the deep, guttural roar of a dying machine. Metal fragments rained back down, hissing as they hit the water. Jensen screamed into the intercom, his voice cracking with adrenaline and awe. Secondary explosion confirmed. "I hear her breaking up, sir." Sounds of structural collapse. By 22:23, a vast, iridescent slick of diesel fuel began to spread across the waves, the lifeblood of the U-boat bleeding into the sea. By 22:26, splinters of wood, scraps of clothing, and German documents bubbled to the surface. At 22:31, a lookout spotted a body, floating face down, clad in the uniform of the Kriegsmarine. The U-boat, later identified as U-558 commanded by Captain Lieutenant Gunnar Kreck, was gone, sent to the bottom with all 49 hands. It was the USS Stalwart's first confirmed kill using the commander's crazy coconuts. The mood on the ship turned from tense anxiety to grim elation. It had worked. The impossible, jury-rigged weapon had actually worked. But there was no time to celebrate. The wolf pack was still out there. At 4:17 hours, before the first hint of dawn, Jensen's voice crackled again. "Second contact. Bearing 310, range 1,100 yards. Estimated depth 65 feet. Stirling repeated the tactic without a flicker of doubt. Flank speed, a direct charge over the target. This time, the crew worked with a newfound deadly efficiency. 2 modified charges were launched 5 seconds apart. The total time from Jensen's initial detection to the attack was a blistering 11 seconds. This U-boat, running deeper than the first, survived the initial blasts. But it was mortally wounded. Jensen heard the unmistakable, high-pitched screech of compressed air. "He's blowing his ballast tanks, sir." Forced emergency surface. A moment later, 440 yards off the Stalwart's bow, the U-boat breached the surface like a wounded whale, its conning tower visibly mangled, listing heavily to one side. Stirling's voice was ice. "Commence firing." The Stalwart's 3-inch guns roared to life, spitting shells across the water. In 8 minutes, they slammed 22 confirmed hits into the submarine's hull. The U-boat, U-634, slid beneath the waves for the last time at 4:39 hours, taking its 52 crewmen with it. 3 other U-boats in the Seawolf pack heard the underwater explosions and the frantic, short-lived radio calls of their comrades. British codebreakers, monitoring the German frequencies, intercepted the confused, encrypted warnings. The messages spoke of a terrifying, new weapon, an instantaneous attack that came without the usual, detectable approach pattern. The hunters were suddenly feeling hunted. The final test came on June 22nd, at 1940 hours. Third contact. Range 2,000 yards. Depth 50 feet. This time, the German commander had been warned. The moment Jensen got a solid sonar lock, the U-boat began frantic evasive maneuvers, executing a crash dive to 130 feet and turning hard aport. But Sterling's response was simply too fast. 9 seconds. From the first ping to the first charge hitting the water. The modified depth charges exploded while the U-boat was in its most vulnerable state, mid-maneuver, changing its depth and angle. The result was catastrophic. A massive secondary explosion at 1948 confirmed the kill. U-421 was gone, with another 50 men. For the next 48 hours, an eerie quiet descended. Convoy HX-240 steamed through the designated ambush zone, but the remaining 9 U-boats of Wolfpack Seawolf never attacked. They shadowed the convoy from a safe distance, their commanders reporting back to headquarters about an enemy who could strike with impossible speed. The wolves had lost their teeth. Eventually, they melted away into the vastness of the Atlantic. Convoy HX-240 crossed the ocean without losing a single ship. 40 freighters, 127,000 tons of supplies, 2,400 civilian lives, all had arrived safely. 0 losses. When a USS Stalwart arrived in Liverpool on June 24th, Sterling submitted a complete technical report on his field expedient weapon. The initial reaction from the U.S. Navy's Bureau of Ordnance was one of profound skepticism. But the results, 3 confirmed U-boat kills in less than 24 hours by a single ship, were impossible to ignore. They ordered immediate, top-secret tests. The tests confirmed everything. Sterling's bottle charges had reduced the attack reaction time from over 45 seconds to under 10. The accuracy of the attacks skyrocketed from a dismal 12% to an astonishing 68%. The structural damage to the escort ship was minimal and deemed an acceptable risk. By July 1943, the Navy ordered mass production of a refined version. The weapon was officially designated the Mark X anti-submarine projector, but among the sailors who knew its origins, it was forever known as the Stalwart Special. The production version, of course, eliminated the glass bottles. Naval engineers designed precise metal floats, standardized the 45-pound Torpex charges, and used braided steel cables cut to exactly 30 feet. Production began in August. By October, 47 destroyer escorts and destroyers were equipped with the new system. The results were immediate and devastating for the U-boat fleet. Between August and December of 1943, U.S. Navy escorts equipped with the Stalwart Special sank a confirmed 31 German submarines. The kill rate for escorts tripled. The U-boat commanders began reporting back that a sonar detection was now tantamount to a death sentence. Admiral Karl Donitz, the mastermind of Germany's submarine fleet, wrote in his war diary in November 1943, "The enemy has developed a response capability that makes our traditional evasion tactics obsolete. Our commanders report there is simply not enough time to maneuver after detection. We are losing the tonnage war." The Battle of the Atlantic, which had been tilting so dangerously in Germany's favor, turned decisively. In May 1943, before Sterling's innovation, U-boats sank 50 Allied ships. In December 1943, with the new system widely implemented, they sank only 11, while losing 23 of their own submarines in the attempt. Commander Bull, Sterling continued to command the USS Stalwart until the end of the war, personally sinking a total of 14 U-boats, the highest record for any single American escort commander. He was awarded the Navy Cross with 2 gold stars, one of the nation's highest and rarest military honors. After the war, captured German engineers were interrogated about Allied anti-submarine tactics. When shown diagrams of Sterling's modified charge system, Captain Zursee Hans Rudolf Rosing, a former U-boat flotilla commander, made a remarkable statement that was recorded in the Naval Archives. "This was not simply a technical improvement," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of defeat. "It was a philosophical shift. You Americans sacrificed the doctrine of standoff safety for the primacy of reaction speed. That required institutional courage, not just clever engineering." Rosing's words captured the essence of Sterling's innovation. It wasn't just about ropes and bottles. It was about the willingness to risk his ship, his career, and his crew on an idea that defied decades of established naval doctrine. It was the audacity to believe that a solution born in the trash could defeat the most sophisticated weapon in the German arsenal. The USS Stalwart survived the war and was scheduled to be decommissioned at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard in 1947. Before the scrappers' torches could be lit, the original crew organized one last, unofficial ceremony. 40 empty bottles, salvaged from a warehouse and rumored to be the very same ones used on that fateful night in 1943, were placed on the ship's fantail. A lone sailor played taps on a bugle as the gray-haired veterans stood at attention, saluting in silence. 20 years after the event, in 1963, a naval historian interviewed the now-retired chief gunner's mate Thomas Hendricks. The historian asked if Hendricks honestly thought the crazy bottle system would work when they were building it on that foggy pier in Argentia. Hendricks let out a dry chuckle. "Son, I thought it was either brilliant madness or just plain madness." But Commander Sterling was right about one fundamental thing. What we were doing before wasn't working. 96 sunken ships don't lie. Sometimes, the only rational option you have left is to try something completely irrational. Those empty bottles worked because nobody